Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's a great reminder. Thank you. Okay. So to back up, NACAC does a survey every 5 years or so. The last one was in 2023, and they ask the 4,000 universities and colleges in the US, what are you looking for in applicants? And then they tally up the scores and they share them with the public. So the top two things that colleges are looking for, the first one is rigor of the curriculum. So what that means is your child challenging him or herself in the curriculum offered by the school? So if the school offers 20 APs, the colleges see that and they look at how many APs and honors classes your student took. So, and colleges read by school. So Pali students are read next to Pali students. You know, they're not comparing Pali students to like Santa Monica High students. So it's kind of apples to apples. So the first one, rigor of the curriculum. The second one is, no surprise, it's grades. And then the third one is character. So I find that really interesting that the third most important thing is character. How do you show character in an application? Well, I'm going to go over that through the different components of the application, but there are several spots where your student can highlight, um, that they give back to the community, that they are collaborative, that they are kind. But I want you to keep those three things in mind. Rigor of the curriculum, which students are choosing their courses for next year, so that's something to keep in mind. Grades, and 10th and 11th grades are the most important on the academic transcript, and then character. Okay. So an application has many components, but they all need to hang together. And hopefully, all of the components tell a story and they tell a cohesive story. So, what are the parts of an application? There's the application itself. There are three different application platforms that most of your students will fill out. There's the UC application. There's the Cal State application if they're applying to like San Diego State or CSUN or Cal Poly. Um, there are transcripts. And when I say, I don't say transcript because most students will have some classes that they took in middle school, which colleges will give them credit for. So if your student took algebra or geometry in middle school, they get high school credit for that. And if they took a foreign language in middle school, um, colleges give them high school credit for that. If they take community colleges, that's another transcript that colleges will look at. If they take classes at an online platform like Silicon Valley High or UC Scout, those are also transcripts which the colleges will have in front of them. The personal statement. This is the essay that we all think of when we think about college. It's sometimes called the Common App essay, and it is a 650-word essay. It is the biggest opportunity for students to speak directly to the colleges, so it's very important. Activity descriptions. Hopefully, your students are already engaged in meaningful extracurricular activities, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The UC application has 20 spots for activities and awards, and the Common Application has 10. Very few students are going to have 20 meaningful activities. But students have to have, I'd say, at least five meaningful activities. So we're looking for quality over quantity, but this is something that really needs to be started in ninth and 10th grades. So if you have one takeaway, if you have a ninth and 10th grader, one takeaway from this meeting, it would be that your student needs to be involved outside of the classroom. Supplemental essays. Each student, if he or she applies to, let's say, 10 schools, which is pretty normal, will write about 20 essays during the college application process. The UCs require 4 essays. There's the personal statement, and then colleges require supplemental essays. And the supplemental essays can be something like, why do you want to attend Tufts University? Or they could be, why do you want to study engineering? Or they could be
Oh,
something like, how do you build community? So there are lots of different supplemental questions. Some colleges ask one or two. Some colleges, like Stanford, have six supplemental questions. So your student needs to have content to write about, and your student also needs to budget enough time to write those 20 essays. And then letters of recommendation. So any of you who have juniors, we're coming up to the time when your student will ask for letters of recommendation. And students generally need two academic letters from junior teachers. And if you have a 10th grader, this is a good time to have a conversation with your student about looking forward to junior year and making those connections with teachers. Because it will enrich the academic experience of your student, but B, because they will need letters of recommendation from these people. Um, Also, it's a good idea to remember that teachers do not get paid anything extra for writing these letters of recommendation. So it's a nice time at the end of the year to have your students reflect and thank all of their teachers. Um, a little thank you note goes a long way with teachers. And then the last thing is some colleges offer interviews. And those are either interviews with alum or interviews with people from the admission staff, or sometimes they are student interviews. Like WashU does something called Bear Chats, where they have students talk with current students. Whenever there's the opportunity for an interview, I would encourage you to try to motivate your student to do it. It shows demonstrated interest. And we'll talk about demonstrated interest a little later. Just to remind you that if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we will be addressing them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so I've broken the application into several different parts. The first part I'm calling the data hub, and that's the application itself. So application platforms open, like if you have a junior, your junior can make a common application account right now. The UC application opens in August. And I believe for the first time, the Cal State application is going to open in August. It usually used to open in October. So it's a good idea to start early. That's something that I emphasize with all of my clients, that you want to start early and you want to make sure all of your applications get in early. So the entire application should be completed by the deadline. I try to get my students to turn in applications before the deadline, because let's say the deadline is November 1st, the entire file should be complete by that time. So that means that students really should be turning things in 2 weeks before the applications are due. And at least 2 weeks before the applications are due, they need to secure a couple other things, the transcripts. So the Pali college counseling team is very good. And if students upload their list to Naviance, their transcripts will be sent. They also need to check about their scores. So SAT scores, AP scores. Some schools allow students to self-report those on the application. Some schools require official test scores be submitted. And it takes about 2 weeks for those to be sent. So if a deadline is November 1st, students need to be sending those in by October 15th. And then finally, letters of rec, I already mentioned those. Students should be asking their teachers at the end of the junior year, and they should be letting teachers know when their letters of recommendation are due. So they should be saying, like, I'm applying early and they're due November 1st, or I'm applying regular decision and they're due at the beginning of January. But again, teachers don't get paid for these. They take a long time to write, and students need to give them some leeway. And also, some teachers only write a certain number of letters. So it's important that your student, gets in there, gets in line before the teachers are all full. Okay, we talked a little bit about the personal statement and the fact that it is the one place where a student gets to speak directly to the admission staff. I could do a whole nother session about what a student should write about in the personal statement. But that is also something that should be started early. A student should revise. Um, the student can always show it to their English teacher. I would not suggest that they have too many people look at it because I found that if you get too many cooks in the kitchen, it really dilutes the student's voice. Um, this is also a place where nowadays students need to be careful with AI and make sure that they're using it correctly because I've spoken with many college admissions people and I've read them myself. You can tell right away when a student has had ChatGPT write an essay. So there are correct ways to use ChatGPT and other AI, and then there are ways that hurt students. All right. Something I do want to point out is that there was a UPenn study done a few years ago. Angela Duckworth, who some of you may know, she's a researcher. She's the one who really started to focus on grit with students, the fact that students who succeed are ones who persevere. And they did a study where they asked colleges what are the traits that colleges are looking for in personal statements. And so I thought it would be a good idea to share those with you. So the first one is pro-social purpose, desire to help others. So that's shown through mostly community service. Leadership, that is shown through, being captain of the swim team or starting a club or having some position in Girl Scouts, something like that, being, the programmer on the robotics team. Um, Learning, they're interested in curiosity. That's very high on the list. So, does your student like to learn? How does that student's learning bleed outside of the classroom? What is your student doing to continue the learning outside the classroom? Goal pursuit. So, can they set goals? Um, are they motivated? Intrinsic motivation is pretty similar. Teamwork. So can they collaborate? Um, Many of us know in our careers, collaboration is really important. And how do they show collaboration? It can be shown in letters of recommendation when teachers talk about students helping other students or group work. It can be shown through the activities that they do, like a sports team, through peer tutoring. And then the last one is perseverance, that idea of grit and being able to pick yourself up when you make a mistake, and also an acknowledgement that mistakes are learning opportunities. Okay, I mentioned the activities list and the spots on the UC and the Common Application, so I have them written down here. Um, Things that can be noted in the activities list are any sports, anything like mock trial, model UN, scouts, babysitting, dog sitting, part-time jobs, anything a student does with their temple or their church, all sorts of volunteering. They can also note hobbies, but hobbies are not as important as activities that involve other people, so organized activities. So being in an orchestra is better for colleges than, let's say, playing the piano, if they don't play the piano in concert with other people. Um, the UC application allows 350 characters for the descriptions, so it's a little bit longer. The common application, it's only 150 characters, which is about a sentence and a half. It's very difficult for students to describe their activities in such a short amount of space. The other things that these applications ask are, how long has your student been doing this activity? How many hours a week? And how many weeks a year? So colleges are really looking for sustained activity. It's much better to have 3 or 4 activities that the student has done for, let's say, 10th, 11th, and 12th grades than to have a bunch of little one-offs. I did a beach cleanup here. I planted some trees here. I tutored for 2 weeks, and I was a camp counselor for 1 week. So that's a pretty weak activities list, as opposed to um, I've been on mock trial for 3 years. I am the team captain for mock trial. I in National Charity League, I am the president this year, or I've been on the swim team for all 4 years. So again, they're looking for a commitment. They're looking for passionate engagement in the activity. Okay, so remember I talked about all the different parts of the application fitting together. And you and the student, and if you're working with somebody, they can help all of these pieces um, hang together better. So the supplemental essays and the interviews are other places to do that. And when answering supplemental essays, I think it's really important for students to first go look at the school's mission. What what is the mission? What are they looking for? And this will help students when they are trying to explain why they would be a good fit and why they want to apply to that school. A lot of schools write the why us essay. And then the other thing is, how is the child going to benefit the school? What is the child bringing to the school? Schools are looking for students who are going to be leaders, who are going to be connectors, who are going to get into dialogue with one another, who are going to be good roommates, who are going to be the ones who sit up in the front of the class and raise their hands, start activities, go abroad, all those types of things. So the student needs to um, you know, it's a connection. It's a two-way connection. Why does the student want the school, and why should the school want the student? And this is how you show these things. Oh, little tip about interviews. If your student is prepping for an interview, AI is a great tool to use. You can have AI ask the student questions and the student can answer. So this is, I think, a very ethical way to use AI, a very smart way. So that's just a side note. Okay, third-party validation. So the student has submitted the application, the essays, and then how does the school validate all of the things that the student is saying? So two of the big ways are letters of recommendation and transcripts. So the Common App does allow students to self-report their grades, but then the transcript should match all of the grades that are on the application. And students should be really intentional about the people that they go to and ask for letters of recommendation. They should be people who know the students well. They should be people who have seen the students grow. Student classes where the students speak the most, where they participate the most. And your student should supply the rec writer with ammunition, like, material to write about. I always suggest that my students give the rec writers a resume so that they know all of their accomplishments. It's also a good idea to give the rec writers a list of schools that the student is applying to and the dates that all of the applications are due, because that's very important. If an application is due November 15th, it's good if the letter of recommendation is in the file by November 15th. Okay, I mentioned demonstrated interest a little earlier. Um, so demonstrated interest, not all schools track it, but about half or a third of them do. And what this means is that schools are very interested in their yield. And the yield is if they accept 100 students, they want to see how many of those students will yield. And in the US World and News Report, colleges go up in the rankings if their yield is high. So UCLA's yield is incredibly high. It's the most applied to school in the entire world, and it has one of the highest yields. You can imagine, like Harvard also has a very high yield. So one of the ways that schools protect their yield is by tracking demonstrated interest. It's a little big brothery, especially now that Colleges can track when students open emails, if they open emails, how long they spend on the email. So it's a good idea to tell your student, first of all, get on the email lists of the schools that they're interested in applying to, and then they should open the emails from those schools. If they get emails from schools that they know they are never going to apply to, they should unsubscribe because their email boxes will be full to the brim junior and senior year with colleges that reach out to them because the email that they put down on the UC application and the common application goes out to colleges. So colleges have access and then they inundate students with emails. Other ways that students can show demonstrated interest. A big one is through campus visits. So if you take your child on a campus visit, you should sign up for an official tour and information session. It's really important. That's how you get in their database. And then they note that you attended. That is the number one way to show demonstrated interest. What if you can't fly to Tulane, because you have work and it's expensive? Then your student should sign up for virtual information sessions and tours, and those also go in their file. Other ways to show demonstrated interest, Pali has admission representatives that come to school each year, and students are alerted to those, and they are allowed to miss some class to go attend those. So for the colleges that are on the students list, it's a great idea to go, get the admission rep's card, and then shoot them an email afterwards thanking them. That also goes into their file. Um, when there are school fairs, college fairs, that's another good way to connect. Often they will, if it's Drive Scan and there's some sort of barcode, they will take a picture of that, and that's another way to get into their system. So demonstrated interest. Big schools like the UCs do not track it. They do not have the bandwidth because they just get too many applications. But it's pretty easy to figure out which schools do track it. Okay, so tips before we go to questions. I did see that there's some ninth grade parents in here and some 10th grade parents. It's very important that your child start keeping track of activities that they're doing. It makes the whole application process much easier. And then you can look at the activities and it's much easier to see where the gaps are. Like if there's no volunteering, that's kind of a red flag, but that's something that you can take care of. Each student should find their why. Like, why do they want to study that major? Why do they want to go to that school? Often it's just, they know the name, it's a brand name school. But to be a successful applicant, they really need to know what that why is. Like, why do they want to go to Purdue? It will be a much more successful application. Look for leadership opportunities. These usually happen in 11th and 12th grade, but not always. Sometimes there's the opportunity to start a club or to be the president of a club or the secretary of the club or the social media manager. There are lots of leadership opportunities to be a peer tutor. Leverage the summers. You, as parents, are probably thinking about this right now. What are your students going to do in the summer? And those summer activities go on that activities list. So summer is a great time to explore something new, to give back to the community, to, volunteer at a hospital, volunteer at a library, volunteer at an old folks home, start a little chamber orchestra with other musicians. There are all sorts of opportunities for the summer. And then overall, make sure your child is challenging herself academically. So that doesn't mean that they have to sign up for all AP and honors courses, but every year the rigor should be going up a little bit. So maybe ninth grade, there are no honors or APs. The next year, maybe you fold in an honors class or two. Junior year, maybe they're taking two APs and on. So colleges look at that. They want that upward trend in rigor. They also, if the student had some problems in ninth grade, they're just figuring themselves out, learning how to study. Colleges also want to see that upward trend in grades. Get to know teachers and counselors. The counselor is your number one ally. And the counselor is the person who sends out your transcripts. The counselor at school is the one who writes a letter of recommendation. Every student applying gets a letter of recommendation from the school counselor. And that letter is an overview of the academics and the extracurriculars of that student. So it's really important that your student gets to know the counselor and doesn't wait until last minute because that's not going to be a good letter of recommendation. And then demonstrate interest. Give the colleges that you are interested in some love, and they will love you back. Okay, so we have plenty of time for questions, and I'm going to start with the questions that are in the chat. Um, okay, so how would you define a meaningful activity? How important is it for all of them to connect with your overall academic and professional interests? Okay. Um, so a meaningful activity is something that has impact usually for other people, and impact is really important for colleges. It's also something that resonates with the student. So, I was just meeting with a 10th grader earlier today who's really interested in acting and she loves storytelling and she is going to apply for theater. And she wants to, during the summer, work with the children's librarian of her local library, and she wants to do story hours for students or for the younger kids where she and her acting troupe act out some of the books that the librarian has pointed out. So that's a meaningful activity. It connects with what she's interested in. It's something she's passionate about. She came up with it on her own. Um, and do they all need to connect? No. Like I have many students who do things like they might volunteer in an animal shelter, but they don't want to be a veterinarian. That's just something that they are interested in. That's a way for them to give back. So not every activity is going to connect with the student's major or overall career goal. So that was a great question. Yes, sports count as activities. So, like Pally has surfing as a sport. It's one of the only schools that has that, and it's a great opportunity. So, yes, track. I just met with another student today. She's a pole vaulter. Um, Swimming, soccer, football, these all count, and they're meaningful activities because students often invest many hours in them. Okay, for demonstrated interest, how do we know which schools prioritize this? So, and does the student have to hit every metric of demonstrated interest, like register for a visit? Okay, so you can just search. You can say, like, does Tulane track demonstrated interest? I mean, first you have to know what the student's list is. And then, do you need to hit every one of those metrics? No. But some schools really lean into demonstrated interest. Let's say Chapman, they track it, but they're not as crazy about it as I mentioned Tulane because Tulane is notorious for caring about demonstrated interest. So for Tulane, I would definitely have the student do either a virtual visit or an in-person visit. I would have them sign up for the email lists. I would have them reach out and connect with the regional admissions rep. It would be very important there. So there are ways you can just search and it will tell you which schools it's very important to, which schools track it, and which schools don't track it. Where can you find quality examples of a resume for a high school junior or senior? That's a great question. So I have resumes from previous years that I share with my students, but I'm sure that you can look on the web, or this would be another great way to use AI to ask AI, give me an example of a a resume for a student who is involved in A, B, and C, and AI will give you an example. Okay. And then Caroline, good question. I may have missed this. Did you say that UC wants transcripts and letters of rec? Okay, that is such a great question because the UCs do not ask for letters of rec. So I think it's unfortunate. And it's again because they don't have the bandwidth, but they don't have students will get two letters of rec from teachers, but they will go to the other schools, but not to the UCs. And then the UCs do not ask for transcripts until they have accepted a student. So students self-report their grades, and the UCs only use 10th and 11th grades to calculate their GPA. Most UCs. UCLA also looks at the ninth through 12th GPA.
What is over?
And once a student gets accepted to the school, so let's say this year I had a lot of students accepted to Berkeley, and once they say yes to Berkeley, Berkeley says, please send a transcript, and you need to send it by, I think it's July 1st. Um, but they need to, again, corroborate the grades that they have put down. And if for some reason there's a difference between what the students put down and what's on the transcript, that will cause problems. Also, if the student said they were going to be in these senior classes and then dropped one or two of those classes, they need to let the UCs know that could cause a problem. So that was a great question. And let's see if we have any more. Let's see. So you may have previously mentioned this, but does UCLA track demonstrated interest? No, none of the UCs track demonstrated interest. They just get too many applications. What if the student has been doing a sport for more than 5 years with professional training, but since he started the sport late and the sport is very competitive, he can't achieve any top awards? So still important to put the sports down. It's the commitment. Remember, we talked about perseverance, goal setting. That's really important. Um, and let's see. And many students don't have top awards, but it's important if the student is on a team that, gets into CIF or something like that. Those are things that you can report. So colleges want context, like how good is the team? Are there specific programs that matter or are disregarded for students who take extra courses? So community college classes are very good. They get honors and AP credit for them. And one semester of a community college class counts for a whole year. Um, and then taking extra core classes is really important. Like at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, students get priority or they go up in the queue if they've taken extra math, extra English. So core classes more important than electives. Unless, let's say, a student wants to apply to engineering, the student needs to have some engineering background. So hopefully the student took an engineering class at school or a summer program, but the students need to show that they are prepared for that major. Applicants pad their activities lists all the time. How do we advise kids about personal integrity? Oh, so that's a great question too. Any counselor, hopefully, will say, students have to sign about three or four things every time they turn an application in, verifying that everything is true in the application. The UCs do spot checks on applications, and something like 10% of all applicants have to verify some information on their applications. And it looks very bad when a student has put something down and is unable to verify it. So, you know, there is a way that colleges check. Um, and uh, that is something that I reinforce with my students, but it's, more importantly, they just need to be truthful in the application process. If a Pali 10th grader hasn't taken any APs yet, but will do IB for the last 2 years, would that be considerate? Yes, actually, colleges love IB. In fact, when I read for Northeastern, it probably went IB AP honors in the mix. So yeah, IB looks great, especially if they are doing some of those high level, the HL courses. What other questions do you all have? These are great questions. Just looking to see if anyone has a hand raised.
This is it, folks. This is your last chance to ask questions. And if you want to come off mute and ask a question directly, I'm sure that's also fine. There's one here from Ivana. What is an IB class?
Oh, okay. International Baccalaureate. And it's coursework that um, is international. And so a lot of the international schools use it, but a lot of the domestic schools are now using them. So it's a whole program, and students have to do different components. And then some high schools offer like a full IB diploma or partial, and students can often mix and match. Like they can take some APs and some IB courses. So that was also a great question. And it looks like, let's see. Okay, is it better to take
And
IB
so Pally
classes?
is about to start offering. Pally is about to start offering the IB. I'm
Oh,
not sure
great.
exactly when it's starting. I think maybe 10th graders can start on
Okay. Is it better to take IB classes over APs? I mean, it depends on what your student, like sometimes the class is offered in AP and not in IB. Again, students can mix and match. Many colleges see them as equal. Some colleges see IB as a little bit more rigorous. What if the IB courses are mostly SL, then HL is still better? So they're standard level and the higher level of IB. HL, it, I think is probably a little bit above AP. Um, and colleges look for those HL. When I was reading for Northeastern, we counted how many HL and how many SL courses the student took. Are there differences in criteria for someone applying to a school that is not in the top tier? Sure. I mean, colleges are looking for different things. An Ivy League school is going to want a student to have a 4.0, um, unweighted, you know, and to have some deep leadership, some really interesting activities, to get stellar letters of recommendation. Whereas, the majority of schools are not going to require that. So schools have different metrics, and again, schools are looking for different things, and they have different institutional priorities. They might want to accept more kids from Kansas and Iowa one year, and so those kids are going to have a priority. Or um, maybe they need more classic students because they have a lot of STEM applicants. So there are a lot of things that go into colleges accepting their class. For kids who apply to UCs and big state schools, how necessary is a private college counselor and how much? So college counseling runs the gamut, I'd say, I mean, to hire a counselor from 5,000 to some people charge 20,000. How important is it? It kind of depends how motivated your student is and how well your student can manage all these different parts. When I applied to college, I applied to two colleges. I filled out a paper application. I wrote an essay. I put it in the mail. But as you can see now, it's pretty complicated, unfortunately. And there are all these different dates. There's a strategy to applications. There are test scores. There are a lot of different elements. So if your student is super organized and motivated, you might not need a college counselor. If your student is someone who needs things broken down, needs due dates, I meet with my students once a week, until every single thing is in. And I like to front load things. So if your student needs that kind of support, or you need that support, it's a really stressful process for parents. And so I meet with parents all the time. I met with parents today for a session. And so, yeah, it's difficult to say, because every student is different who will need a college counselor outside. Okay, let's see. Where was I? What if a student takes IB and the schedules conflict with orchestra? It's too complicated for me to answer. That's a very specific question. Do you think the UCs will bring back testing? No, I don't, because they were sued over their application process, and one of the ways they complied was by getting rid of testing. And there was some talk about them coming up with their own test, but it's too difficult for them. And so, no, I don't think they'll bring back testing. Pally's IB program is offering SL. Would you still recommend it? Yes, I would still recommend it. What breaks through on UCLA and Berkeley applications? Again, that's too specific for me to answer right now. Do Ivy Leagues basically require a FOIA? Yes. Yes. So to apply to an Ivy League, a student should have no Bs and be successful. Should have an easy 4.0. And even then, if you think about every high school in the United States has a valedictorian, um, and the Ivy Leagues cannot even accept all of the valedictorians. So many more qualified applicants are turned away just because there is not enough room. When is the best time to start working with a college counselor? So I start working with most of my students in the 10th grade to set the foundation, to make sure the activities are happening, to make sure they have good study habits, to help with course selection, to help with summer programs. But I think junior year is also a good year to start, especially if it's at the beginning of the year, so you still have some time to make some of these changes before the application process. Will universities discriminate against a counselor versus a self-applicant? So most universities don't know whether a student worked with a counselor. And I have to say, like in the LA area, a lot of students work with counselors. There are a few schools that ask, very few, I'd say like less than 1% will ask on the application, did you work with a counselor? And then I encourage the students to be honest. Would participating in Model UN be something colleges considered? Yes. Yeah, even if some of these activities, even if they happen during the school day, or even just for a few months a year, are really important. Model UN is, I think, along with mock trial, working on the newspaper, working on the yearbook, these are really fabulous ways to get involved and give back and to show leadership. These are great questions. Okay, well, if that is it, um, I will wrap up. So thank you all for attending. You know, it's a good sign that you are here. You're already thinking about how to support your student through this process. And it really is a team effort, you know, the whole family, because it's a long process and it can be stressful, but it doesn't have to be if you start early enough. And you were all here learning about ways to start early enough. And I want to thank Caroline and the PTSA. This is my third year speaking to Pally. The other two times I've done it in person, but it's much easier to do it via Zoom. So thank you. And I think it's easier for a lot of parents also who work to attend via Zoom. So thank you again. And I
Thank you
would,
very much, Dr. Morgan. We really appreciate it. And it was a great presentation, super succinct, but very focused on content and great to have a chance for people to ask questions as well. So thank you very much. It is recorded.
yes.
And so if you can send that over to me as soon as it's done, we will get it out to everyone and also share it with parents who weren't able to make it this evening. So thank you very, very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to support our parent community like this.
You
Thank
are
you.
so welcome. I love Pally. Well, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
All the best. And thank you very much for coming along, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.